Hello and greetings to you from the great city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the United States. It is an absolute honor to be with you, our colleagues from around the world, here at the Global Tourism Forum Recovery and Beyond Summit. Today's agenda includes some brilliant thought leaders throughout our industry. I am honored to bring some of those perspectives to you from the US and Canada. Today, I'll be joined by our colleagues from dynamic markets including Toronto, San Diego, Dallas, and Washington, D.C. As we all know, the global travel sector has experienced an incredible loss in 2020, and by most estimations, it will take us 2 to 3 years to fully recover. In the United States, travel spending was reduced by $443 billion, and we have lost approximately 4.2 million jobs since the beginning of the pandemic. Here in Pittsburgh, tourism was a $6.5 billion industry before the pandemic. This year, we are expecting a reduction of $3.6 billion in direct spend from fewer travelers, resulting in the loss of over 24,000 jobs. Even at our agency, we reduced our workforce by 54%. The devastation experienced in revenue and job loss has also greatly impacted our neighbors throughout North America. We hear stories every day across the continent about businesses closing permanently due to the loss of revenue. These stories are familiar around the globe as we collectively battle the pandemic. In the United States, we also faced a highly contested presidential election this year. The election news coverage consumed our media platforms for most of the year and continues to do so. Many of you have seen a great deal of attention on our state of Pennsylvania and on our city of Pittsburgh during the election, as we were among the last voting districts to report results, thus swinging the election in President-elect Biden's favor. I can personally speak to the inspiration I have found throughout these major challenges. Like many of you, we are part of an effort of resiliency and long-term strategic planning. As we engage our local travel community, one thing is clear: there is a collective energy to rebuild and recover. When it comes down to it, there is no other option. The travel sector may act a bit differently as we move forward, but the appetite to explore and experience still exists in all of us. So how do we confidently look forward? As an industry, unity is key. Here in our region, we have seen a higher level of collaboration more than ever before. Coming together are our cultural institutions, including 9 performance theaters, the symphony, the ballet, our musicians, and over 40 museums and galleries. In addition, our attractions, including theme parks, riverboat cruise lines, our outdoor adventures, our international airport, hotels, restaurants, tour operators, as well as our city, county, and state officials. We have a lot of work to do, but we know that a unified approach will get us to better days ahead. And this message of unity brings us to our conversation today with industry leaders here in North America. In this session, we're going to travel around the US and Canada and get the perspective of some inspirational colleagues doing great work on behalf of their communities. Today, we're going to visit San Diego, Washington, D.C., Vancouver, and Dallas. Our first stop is in San Diego. Hi, Kerri. Thanks for taking some time and letting us at least visit you in San Diego virtually, if not in person. So thanks for taking the time to be on this call with us today. Maybe just start out by giving our audience a little idea of who you are and what you do.
So good morning, and thank you so much for having me today. I wish you were here in San Diego and that we were traveling to see each other, but we'll get there hopefully soon. So Kerri Kapich, I am the COO of the San Diego Tourism Authority, and I've got about 30 years experience in destination marketing, and native San Diegan, native Californian, obviously, and really surprising to see some of the things that have happened to our state and to our community over this past year.
Yeah, that leads into a really good, the really important part of this conversation, Kerri. What are you seeing in San Diego right now? Obviously, from a global tourism standpoint, we really are looking at devastation to our industry around the world, which is unheard of. We've seen pockets of disruption in the past, but this really is the first time, I think, in most of our careers where we see an impact so globally, from an impact standpoint, of course. What are you seeing in San Diego?
So, what we're seeing in San Diego is much like what you're seeing in other communities where the tourism and the hospitality community has just been devastated by the pandemic. So, tourism revenues are down 50% year to date. And when we take a look at jobs in tourism, we're down 40% in terms of jobs within our sector. We have been hit far harder than any other sector, harder than retail, harder than education. And I think it's something that has certainly surprised many stakeholders, elected leaders, and people within public health as they start to learn more about our industry and about the sector and the types of jobs and the type of work that we do, and just the critical function of what it is we do as destination marketers to support our community, generate revenues, and produce jobs for all San Diegans.
Yeah, that jobs impact is it's really hard to fathom that those impacts are so deep into the level that we're seeing in so many of our communities. We are starting to see, hopefully, in most markets around the world, we are starting to see some green shoots. We're seeing some opportunities starting to arise. Certainly with the recent news of more vaccines and advanced treatments coming into the marketplace, we're hopeful that that's going to have a positive impact on us as we move forward. What are you looking at from San Diego's perspective when it comes to recovery? How do you think next year and the years beyond that are going to shape up for the travel sector in your community?
Unfortunately, California has been one of the most restrictive states in regards to activities and a very slow path forward in terms of the leisure and hospitality sector. It's really unfortunate that the types of restrictions that have been put into place have really been so targeted to our industry. And that part has been deeply concerning. We are still the only state to not allow any type of meetings. So California allows no meetings. And in fact, as we go forward, even with vaccinations, they're looking at still quite a few restrictions in place in terms of capacities, whether it be at a theme park or operations for restaurants or for meetings, conventions, live events. So we have, in working with tourism economics, we're looking at least a 5-year recovery horizon. And we're very concerned about some of the policies out of Sacramento with public health and the governor's office in regards to certain sectors like theme parks not being able to take visitors from outside of 120 miles. When you start to see policies that target travel specifically and limit activities and start to say you can only have guests from within your own neighborhood or your own community, that is very troubling to us. And so we've been working very closely with not only the county health team here in San Diego and elected officials, but also advocacy up in Sacramento to say it's not travel that is the problem. When you take a look at how businesses have re-engineered their operations and how safe they are operating, what our hotels are doing, what our theme parks have done, you start to understand that really this is not the issue in terms of infection and spread. It's other activities that are happening. So there's a great sense of frustration within our local business community, and a deep fear because we still have 77,000 San Diegans who are unemployed at this time. And we don't know when we can call those workers back because it is such a long horizon going forward.
Yeah, you've touched on so many points that are critical to us, certainly from a government regulation perspective. And we've seen this certainly in the United States, where there has been such varied policy application across the country that is not necessarily proving positive one way or another when you look and compare them side by side. And you do see these deep restrictions having very impactful results for businesses, for our families, for our neighbors, people who are losing their jobs, and they just don't know when the end is in sight. So it's a really difficult time, and certainly for your area and California in general, access to theme parks, the events industries, the conventions, live events, and so forth are absolutely cornerstones to everything that you do. So I appreciate the challenge that you're under. As you're looking forward to next year and the year after, you mentioned that it's likely going to be a 5-year recovery timeline. Certainly for us here in southwestern Pennsylvania, we've our research is showing similar results. We're probably somewhere around 3 years, it seems. But you know, that long-term recovery timeline is very difficult. How does your authority or your agency, how do you plan for that? Meaning, do you look more short-term as far as, okay, what do we need to do right now? What do we need to do 6 months, a year, and then, you know, leading up to that 5 years? How are you breaking that down from a strategic standpoint?
So we, unfortunately, we've gone through, and I personally have gone through many crises in travel before. So from 9/11 to the Great Recession, to SARS and other challenges, even hepatitis A, which we had an outbreak in San Diego and California. So unfortunately, we're kind of warriors when it comes to this, which I hate to say, but you basically have to pivot very quickly. And we did. We did an immediate pivot to close-in drive markets, and we're fortunate in San Diego, there's 50 million residents within California, Arizona, and Nevada. So instead of doing a global program of work, we were marketing in 8 countries prior to the pandemic. We're now really marketing within 3 states. And that is what we'll do going forward for the short term. And that longer term build for our community and for our businesses, it's just going to take time. We'll need to make sure that our community is ready, that we're allowed to do certain types of activities. We'll need to make sure that resources are there to continue our efforts. And we're fortunate that we have a good, strong leisure travel destination, and we've had revenues to do consumer advertising. If we didn't have that, our community would be really in a just even more devastated than it is. So it's continuing to work with stakeholders on the importance of what we're doing, get buy-in in terms of messaging, community readiness, safety, what is happening both with businesses and then also travelers that we host in. So it's a lot of work and a big shift as an organization, but we've been able to do that very quickly and pivot very quickly.
Yeah, and that's certainly seen. You know, we see a lot of news out of San Diego, in particular on the tourism industry, because it is such a big part of your economy. And the efforts that you're putting forward are certainly going to impact that in a positive way. So our lessons, Kerri, is to be nimble, to collaborate, to make sure that you're bringing the industry along, and certainly keep carrying that message to our elected officials to try to get our regulations a little bit more consistent and certainly travel friendly. Kerri, thank you so much for your time. We sincerely appreciate it. We sincerely appreciate your insight. You are certainly someone that has seen a lot of various things that have impacted our industry, and we certainly look to you for your leadership. So thank you very much, Kerri, and we hope to see you soon in person.
Sounds great. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Kerri. So now we've traveled across the country, and now we're landing in Washington, D.C. with my friend Elliott. Elliott, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us on the forum today. Maybe first to kick off, maybe just give us a little bit of an introduction of who you are for those that don't know you.
Absolutely. First of all, anything you ask me to do, I'm going to do. So I'm happy to be here. I run Destination DC, which is the DMO for Washington, D.C. I've been in this industry for 30 years, been in Washington right after 9/11 in December 2001. I also happen to chair the U.S. Travel Association at one of the most interesting times in our industry currently.
Interesting times indeed. What does it look like in Washington, D.C. right now from a pandemic travel disruption standpoint? We've just come through a highly contested presidential election not too long ago. What's going on in your market?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good question. I mean, and it really gives us a chance to really focus on the fact that there are really 2 Washington, D.C.s. There's the Washington that people see every single day, which is usually tied to congressional, Congress, politics, White House, which, plus or minus has been very interesting the last few years. And then, of course, there's the other component, which is what we focus on in terms of promoting DC as a destination and the 750,000 people that live here. So now that the election is over, the political side comes everything comes to life in Washington, D.C. in regards to preparing for the 45th president. So, right now it's all about, the things that are happening and or not happening with number 44 versus 45. I don't have to tell you a little bit more about that because all you guys understand what that means. But it also gives us a chance to focus on what the new Congress looks like, what we should expect from the new president, and equally as much how we're going to handle whatever inauguration looks like in Washington, which is normally a huge economic shot in the arm for us in the month of January, as well as looking towards our future in a COVID world, plus or minus a vaccine.
Yeah, it's incredible. These opportunities, especially something as large as an inauguration for a market like DC, those events are so critical. And as you said, it's a good shot in the arm from an economic input standpoint. That's in January. What else? And hopefully that happens in January, whatever that looks like. As you mentioned, it's still to be determined. But beyond that, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, what is it that you're forecasting for DC? And I know it's difficult. We're not going to hold you to it. But what is your gut instinct on where you're going to go from a recovery standpoint?
My friend, the joke that I've been using is that the batteries in my crystal ball have died, so I really can't look and rely on that right now. Right now we're kind of, what COVID has been for us is almost like a dysfunctional relationship. Whereas at first we were all in denial in terms of, this is not going to be as bad as we thought it was, to the reality that it was bad, and then we went into shock, and then we were trying to manage in the dark. And now we are trying to move forward, and we've been moving forward in terms of, okay, what do we do? So our reality is similar to everyone else's. We rely very heavily on the international market from a leisure perspective. It's not going to be happening for a long time. A long time could be 12 months or so. And, there are some signs of opportunity with the London to Newark flight and some of the testing that's there, which means that perhaps things will open up in terms of international travel, but it's going to be a tough road ahead. We're focusing on the domestic market, the 250-mile radius of Washington, D.C., which happens to be 50 million people. But we also recognize that as much as we love the domestic traveler, they don't stay as long and spend as much. So that's going to hurt us economically. As we look at the meetings market, the international meetings market it's going to be a tough road, but in most cases, they're looking 3 to 5 years out anyway, which is good. As we look at the citywide market and meetings market as a whole, there are opportunities as we look at the third and fourth quarters of 2021 in terms of rebound, which is a relative term. So we're really looking at 24 months or so before we get back to where we were. Some people are saying 36 months. So we're cautiously optimistic, but we also recognize the fact that we are also the home to a lot of associations. They need to meet because they need those revenues to basically operate their organizations. In some cases, they rely on those revenues to the tune of 70%. So they're wanting to meet again. And we're hoping that a lot of them will decide to meet closer to home in Washington, D.C., and then bring people to the city as we're looking at a vaccine being in place or more safety protocols tied to meeting in person.
Yeah, that raises a really good point. And side note, it's really great that DC is such a diversified market. You have the ability to I'm going to say it, pivot from international travel to domestic travel, meetings markets to smaller meetings and so forth. So it's great that your market is so diversified, and hopefully that will help from a recovery standpoint. But in your last comment, you referenced a little bit about the impact of COVID and how our local communities are dealing with it. One of the things that Kerri just told us in her comments was that the challenge that they have in California is just restrictions. They have so many restrictions statewide and even in their local community that it's really difficult for large-scale amusement parks or theme parks, certainly conferences, conventions, and so forth to operate. Are you seeing a similar situation in DC from a restriction standpoint? Or if so, or if not, how is that going to affect you in the long term?
Yeah, we're seeing the same restrictions. I mean, I think that as I put on my U.S. travel hat, the biggest issue we have is that we've got 50 states in the District of Columbia that work basically as individual countries and set their own rules and policies. And they're not consistent compared to other countries in Europe and other international countries, whereas the standard is consistent throughout that country. Not only is it confusing for an association headquartered in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh wanting to meet in another city because they've got to figure out what those, what phase of shutdown or opening those particular cities are in. We're in phase two. We cannot have groups larger than 25 or so people meeting, which is very difficult. And basically it means we cannot host any major citywides at this point. And that is a problem as we're looking towards our future. Right now, a lot of our big box hotels, those hotels with 1,000 rooms or more, still remain closed. And that's unprecedented in a market like this, coming off of a peak season for Washington. So it is very it's confusing, especially to the international market. What's equally confusing is the fact that we have been inconsistent in terms of the protocol tied to safety, vis-a-vis just wearing a mask. And, I'm not going to get into a political rant, but, we're looking towards a more consistent message as we look at a change of administration, whereas wearing a mask saves lives, and wearing a mask helps to cut down or reduce the number of cases of COVID, which allows us to rebound a lot faster. So these are the lights at the end of the tunnel as we look at where we have been. But, mayors and cities and governors, they've got a tough call, because they're focusing on the economics of their destinations, but they're also thinking about the lives of individuals that work in our industry and other industries, and how do we keep people safe? So I understand it. It's frustrating. And I wish there was more consistency from a perspective, from a government perspective nationwide. But that's not where we are.
Yeah, no truer words have ever been spoken. And hopefully next year, we're going to see a lot more of that consistency, certainly from a messaging standpoint.
Absolutely.
Well, Elliott, thank you so much for your time. I can't tell you how much we appreciate your time, your friendship, your leadership, and certainly taking some time to be with us on this session today. So thank you very much.
Anytime, my friend. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you. We're actually going to get on a virtual plane now and fly across the continent and land in Vancouver and spend a little bit of time with Royce. Thanks again,
Beautiful
Elliott.
city. Ciao. See you.
So now we've left Washington, D.C. and landed firmly in the beautiful city of Vancouver. And we're speaking with the new CEO, Royce. And Royce, first of all, thank you for taking the time to visit with us in this session. And what I'd like to start out with is, could you give us a quick introduction of who you are?
Sure. Well, thanks very much for having me and connecting in with Vancouver. It's delightful to be here. Royce Chwin, President and CEO of Tourism Vancouver, and started this job in the middle of a pandemic, and started July the 13th of this year, and changed provinces, cities, and organizations. And why not? If not now, then when? And so it was a great opportunity to come back to Vancouver, which is my hometown here in beautiful British Columbia, to try to help an organization, a 117-year-old organization, weather this pandemic, but more than weathering, just transforming. This is an opportunity for transformation and trying to answer a question that we ask ourselves: what does the future need as it relates to the role of a DMO?
Yeah, that's an incredible opportunity that you have stepped up to the challenge with I'm sure with full gusto and full enthusiasm. I didn't realize that your organization was so old. That's truly amazing. And I imagine that in its 117-year history, that this certainly is unlike anything that it's faced. I'm sure there's been other challenges beyond our career time, but it's really incredible. What's the landscape look like in Vancouver right now, Royce? What's going on in your market?
I think it's consistent with many of our colleagues across the world, certainly North America. And quite frankly, it's bleak, and bleak would be positive. Meaning that fully into the second wave right now, we are halfway through a sort of a phase 3 opening, if you will, meaning that some businesses are open, some aren't. Most are operating with limited capacity. And this continues to go through a very tough season. As you know, fall and winter for our industry tends to take a little bit of a dip. And now you add this on top of it. To further compound it, and not to be dramatic, but to really understand how the Vancouver visitor economy works. You have, of course, residents spending and supporting local businesses like restaurants and attractions. You also have your downtown office workers. Well, when they're showing up to their offices at 5%, 10% rates, that impacts, again, spending on retail, restaurants, etc. Now take out the visitor economy itself, and that's travelers, whether it's cruise, people coming through for cruise, rail, and Rockies, those kinds of things, utilizing far more in the hotels, the meetings industry. All cultural events are shut down, sporting events are shut down. You've got a triple hit on an economy that requires a robust visitor economy for its success.
Yeah, it's interesting. You named quite a few different parts of your travel economy, and it's certainly a very diversified sector for sure. Vancouver is an amazing city and an amazing location that gives you the opportunity to really take advantage of a lot of different pools of consumers, if you will. One of the things that Kerri has mentioned, and even Elliott in the DC market, is the effect of regulations on the travel economy. Obviously, COVID has had an unrelenting level of challenge or levels of challenge for all of us. But on top of that, we have government organizations who are trying to obviously limit those impacts in the best way with health and safety of their residents in mind. What kind of regulations are you seeing in Vancouver when it comes to controlling the pandemic, and how does that affect in the travel industry?
Yeah, it is the quintessential between a rock and a hard place, because the provincial health office, their mandate is to manage and support the integrity of the healthcare system so it does not get overrun. And in doing so, their job will be to put out health orders that will essentially shut down capacity. So, for example, we can't have gatherings larger than 50 people. So it's effectively flatlined the meetings industry. Cruise ships have been, of course, cut out of Canadian waters to manage that as well. Restaurant capacity operating at 50%. So all of those things done to try to manage transmission rates. The reality is, in all of its great effort, but the reality is where we're finding the transmission rates is in the home and maybe, quite frankly, schools. We're not seeing transmission rates come out of restaurants and retails. We're not seeing those stories, but yet the impact of provincial health orders are impacting the business landscape, therefore really hitting business bottom line, killing off liquidity, killing off cash flow. So that's the rock and the hard place that we're in between right now.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation. One of the things you said earlier that resounds certainly with me, but I think with most of our audience, is the fact that there are opportunities that come out of this situation. You know, as we start to look forward, we've got wonderful news earlier this month when it came to new vaccines that are being introduced into the market, more advanced treatments, which is wonderful news for all of us. When you're looking forward over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and so on, what is your vision of recovery, whether it's timeline related or where the most immediate and near-term opportunities are going to be? What does recovery look like for you?
Recovery, we don't even call it recovery. So I'll even start there, because we can't recover what's lost. But what we can do, and what we've been talking about, is rebuilding and then restarting. And we've got to rebuild our local markets. We have to rebuild confidence. And one of the biggest conversations we have is, how do we get people from fear of the virus to respect of the virus that now starts to unlock volumes of people to start moving around? The other part of reopening, if you will, is the restart. And what a great opportunity now for the various groups that maybe have not worked together as closely in the past, who are now working incredibly closely to align our efforts in a way that reopens this market, that is easy for the government to understand, but most importantly is easy for communities and travelers to understand and what's available in this market. And those will be the steps that we're going to take over the next couple of months. So really managing fear to respect, and coordinated and a collaborated effort to rebuild and restart this market. And that was the call I was just on just prior to coming on and joining you, was various groups around BC talking about how we're going to do that and actually putting the plan in place for action to do this.
Well, you've summed that up so nicely. You know, there's so many things that are important to us moving forward, and I mentioned this in my opening comments, is that unification is key, certainly on a market-to-market basis, making sure that we are coming together as a community to move our industry forward. I also really like your point about recovery versus rebuilding. Well said. We cannot recover what we've already lost, but we certainly can rebuild from here, and this is a great point to do that. Royce, thank you so much for your words of wisdom. I think that there is a lot to be said and a lot of confidence to be had, certainly in your area with your leadership and everything that your organization is doing to bring the community together. We're certainly proud of what you're doing, and we're proud to have you as part of this conversation today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here, and we will get through this.
We will. There's no other choice.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks, Royce. Appreciate it. So we've left Vancouver, an amazing city, of course, in our great conversation with Royce, and now we have landed in the amazing city of Dallas, Texas, where I'm sure it's probably a bit warmer than it might be up in Vancouver at this point. And of course, our friend Craig Davis is here to join us. Craig, first of all, let me say thank you. Thank you for your time. And why don't you just introduce yourself to our audience?
Thanks, Jerad, and thanks for the opportunity to be here with you today. My name is Craig Davis. I am the president and CEO of Visit Dallas. I was the previous president and CEO of Visit Pittsburgh, so Jerad and I go back a long ways, and I'm very thankful that he asked me here today.
Well, we are certainly thankful for your time, Craig. This is a busy time for us all as we certainly try to navigate this pandemic and really help our communities rebuild and look towards a brighter future. What does the reality look like for you in Dallas? What's going on in the travel economy in your neck of the woods?
Well, the reality is, I think the same with a lot of the parts of North America, is that we had the surge came last March or in March. And then we had this surge, and then it kind of abated a little bit. And then we opened up our economy here, and then we've had surges since. So we've been riding this wave. Right now we're surging again, but we've had a lot of stops and starts along the way. Dallas's tourism economy is so group-based for both business events, MICE, and also for sports events, that it has been a real tragedy for us, because our job has been, we've done a great job as a team long before I got here back in January. Having business on the books here in Dallas is so incredibly vital to our success. And the team here at Visit Dallas and our sports commission had our 2021 locked in for the best year on record. And then, 20 and 21 and beyond. 20, of course, fell apart right away. We've been trying to salvage latter part of 2020 and into 2021, and that is slowly chipping away and moving to future dates, but also canceling altogether. Year to date right now, we have canceled 2 million room nights just in lodging alone, just what we've touched. But there are so many other city properties that have also gone through that we're not aware of. So this has been particularly devastating on our economy, because we count so much on large crowds here in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, it's an incredible time, and when you hear numbers like that, it really explains the situation from a reality standpoint. And obviously, when you lose that kind of business, the knock-on to job loss and impacting people in their individual lives is quite profound.
Yeah, to sort of make a finer point of that, and it's probably no different than most of my counterparts around the world, and certainly North America. When this hit back in March, we went from, March in Dallas is peak season. So we went through hotel occupancies in the high 70s down to single digits almost overnight. Now, year to date, that has kind of crept up around the 40% mark, but now we're going back down again. So we just don't know what to expect. That's our biggest challenge, is that we have a plan in place and we're ready to go, but we don't know when we're going to, have the opportunity really to put the true plans in place for recovery.
Yeah, and that leads us into this next part of the conversation quite nicely. When it comes to recovery, trying to create that future forecast is so difficult for everyone. hopefully, with a lot of the news that we received earlier in the month, whether it's regarding vaccines or advanced treatment, and really what a lot of our economists and our health professionals are telling us, that next year certainly is going to be a much more positive year than what 2020 is or has been. One of the things that I thought was interesting that Royce just mentioned in our conversation was that in Vancouver, and this is something that he and his community have really applied, is moving away from the term recovery, and in using his words, you can't recover what you've lost. That really is about rebuilding. But we all talk about recovery, rebuilding. We use those words obviously quite interchangeably. But it's interesting to really understand and appreciate the fact that we're all doing the same thing as far as trying to figure out a very uncertain future. So in Dallas and with your crystal ball and what you and your team are looking for as you move forward, what does recovery or rebuilding look like for Dallas and your part of the country?
Well, just to sort of speak first to the crystal ball, I don't do much in the way that I manage based upon feelings. I based upon facts or whatever. I have the best people that I can possibly have around me to have their wisdom and their guidance, and then I act accordingly based upon that. That means the people that I've surrounded myself with here in Dallas, or the people that we rely on and purchase data from. So we went out when the pandemic hit, and we talked to our friends at Tourism Economics, which in the US, and I'm sure around the world, is the gold standard when it comes to tourism economics, or excuse me, economic forecasts in the tourism space. So Adam Sachs, and I understand he's also a speaker at this forum. His team came into Dallas and did a forecast for us, and they've since revised it a couple of times. So the last time we did the forecast revision was a few weeks ago, and they actually sweetened the forecast just a little bit from the original, but we made all of our decisions based on that forecast. Until that forecast changes, we're going to use our instincts, or we're going to work around that. We're going to plan for the worst, quite frankly, and manage from there. We've, of course, like everybody else, had to reduce our staff. We've had to make adjustments in our business plan, clearly. We've been living off of almost no revenue like everybody else, or like most of us. So it's been as devastating, or no more devastating here in Dallas as it has been around the world. But looking forward, we want to use recovery or whatever your terminology is. For us, it'll start with a vaccine, which we're hoping will become widespread in the next couple months. And then getting that business confidence back. For us, I think, and probably for the rest of the world, it's when the corporate community decides to return, because we're so association based here in Dallas, and that what associations count on is corporate support. So if corporate is not supporting the associations financially or coming to the meetings, then that's a problem for us. So we've had a lot of our association customers have said, hey, we meet tomorrow, but we don't have any exhibitors show up. And that kills our business model. And that makes all the sense in the world to me. So we know it's going to trickle back, but I do know that there's pent up demand. I do know the reality is that most of our customer base, they need to meet to financially survive. So I don't believe that virtual meetings are the wave of the future. I think virtual will be side by side with in-person meetings. But I do believe that pent up demand will come back. And for Dallas, the one market that's going to come back and will come back if our county health officials allow it is youth sports. Youth sports is ready to go. They are already meeting across the country. We have youth sporting events in December, January, February, and March. And these are gigantic events. And we have put a way forward that they're going to be socially responsible. But they are planning to meet. And if we have the protocols in place to have them come in, and we believe that somebody needs to sort of crack that barrier and come in and meet and give everybody else the confidence that they can meet, and that we're going to be responsible as hosts and they're going to be responsible as delegates. And we can get through this without having that become an event that creates more spread for the coronavirus. So in a nutshell, I think it's going to happen slowly, but I think youth sports is going to bring us back. And then once the corporate community will release travel bans, I think that's going to be a huge indicator for the rest of us that we can start to return slowly but surely to business as usual.
Yeah, those are fantastic points. And really, it does come down to confidence. Confidence among our consumers, our event attendees, event organizers, our residents, and so forth. That level of confidence is going to be paramount as we try to figure out this recovery. Well, Craig, I think you said it all. I think that there is certainly a lot to be optimistic about. There are many opportunities that are yet to be uncovered.
Yes.
Youth sports, as you mentioned, in the near term is a great opportunity for a lot of destinations, certainly here in North America. That is very much seen. Craig, thank you very much for your time. We sincerely appreciate it. And thanks for taking time out of your day to be with us.
Thank you so much, Jerad.
Absolutely. And that actually wraps up our session. We want to thank everyone who has taken the time to listen to what we had to say from North America. And we wish you continued good health, continued strong recovery, and enjoying the rest of the forum. So thank you very much.